All right, if you want to go ahead and if you got your Bibles, go ahead and turn to Matthew chapter 13. Matthew chapter 13. I think I'm on here. All right. And I don't know, let's see, there might be a couple of you that have been in my class over the past couple of weeks. I wasn't here last week, so I appreciate Alan teaching in here and doing that, and I appreciate Marshall asking me to do his class while he's on vacation, and that retired life must be pretty good. But over the past few weeks, I've started doing parables through the Bible. And a couple weeks ago, in chapter 13, we did the parable of the sower. And again, that goes from verse 1 all the way until verse 23. So we went through that a couple weeks ago. But this morning, I want to go over the parable of the wheat and the tares. And I want to kind of go through it, and we'll kind of explain a little bit of it and see how it applies to our life today. And hopefully over the next 30 minutes or so you can learn something, and I won't be as long as Marshall, I promise. I normally can only last about 30 minutes. But we'll get started here, and normally in my class I'll let them read, but I'll read for time's sake here. So we're in Matthew chapter 13, and we'll start in verse 24. And it says, "Another parable put he forth unto them, saying, The kingdom of heaven is likened unto a man which soweth good seed in his field. But while men slept, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat, and went his way. But when the blade was sprung up and brought forth fruit, then appeared the tares also. So the servants of the householder came and said unto him, Sir, didst not thou sow good seed in thy field? From whence then hath it tares? He said unto them, An enemy hath done this. The servants said unto him, Wilt thou then that we go and gather them up? But he said, Nay, lest while he gather up the tares, ye root up also the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. And in the time of the harvest I will say to the reapers, Gather ye together first the tares, and bind them in bundles to burn them, but gather the wheat into my barn." And we'll skip down to verse 37. It says, He answered and said unto them, He that soweth the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world. The good seed are the children of the kingdom, but the tares are the children of the wicked one. The enemy that sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the world, and the reapers are the angels. As therefore the tares are gathered and burned in the fire, so shall it be in the end of the world. The Son of Man shall send forth his angels, and they shall gather out of his kingdom all things that offend, and them which do iniquity, and shall cast them into a furnace of fire. There shall be wailing and gnashing of teeth. Then shall the righteous shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Who hath ears, let him hear." So Jesus here, he's already, if you know anything about his ministry, he started off his ministry, and he was getting a lot of flack and a lot of pushback from the Pharisees and all of those religious leaders of his day. And he starts in chapter 13, he starts going into teaching in parables. And like I mentioned earlier, the first 23 verses of chapter 13 is the parable of the sower. We kind of went through all that a couple weeks ago. And then he gets to 24 where he goes to another parable. And what's interesting to me is that if you notice, I skipped a section from verse, 31 through 33, he goes through some more parables. But in verse 34, he says, all these things spake Jesus unto multiples and parables. So when he was speaking in these parables, in the kind of the application of an everyday farmer, everyday life, there was multitudes of people that were listening to him. But you notice in verse 36, he says, then Jesus sent the multitude away. So he sent all these people away. And he went into the house, and his disciples came unto him, saying, declare unto us the parable of the tares of the field. So what kind of struck me is, if you know anything about a parable is an earthly story with a heavenly meaning. And Jesus taught in parables. He taught in parables to kind of not only make it more, I guess, practical for the person listening, but also to those that wanted a deeper meaning and to know more about the kingdom of heaven. As the disciples did, he says in the first part of chapter 13 about the mysteries of the kingdom, the mystery of the kingdom of heaven, the kind of going deeper into what Jesus was saying. And he kind of says that, kind of explains it a lot better in the latter part of chapter 13 when you get into verse 37 and 38 and so forth. But this morning I want to talk about there's three things I kind of want to touch on. I want to talk about the sowing of the tares and who does that and what that means. The growing of the tares and the knowing of the tares. So this morning, if we go to the first part, the sowing of the tares. The good seed is sowed by the Lord, by Jesus. It clearly says, and that's one thing I like about the parables, is Jesus gives the application, gives the story, but then also gives what everything means in that story from a heavenly sense. And in verse 7, the good seed is sown by the Son of Man. The Son of Man is another term Jesus used for himself. So Jesus sows the good seed. So the person that sows the tares is Satan, is the wicked one. It says also in verse 39, it says the enemy that sowed them is the devil, talking about the tares. The tares is the work of Satan. We know that Satan is a counterfeit to everything that the Lord is, that Jesus is. And we know this by, if you know anything about wheat and tares, and I know y'all probably know about agriculture stuff way more than I do. I know Clint probably for sure does. But about wheat and tares, when they're growing, they look almost identical. Everything from the wheat and the tare, they grow, they look the same. And it's not until you get to the harvest that you can identify the fruit of the wheat and then the weed of the tares. So again, the sowing of the tares is Satan. Satan is a counterfeit. One thing that Satan uses more than anything, I believe, is the term religion, the religion as a whole. Satan I truly believe that if Satan can get into the church, into the quote-unquote religion, then he has his counterfeit. There's people have counterfeits for everything. There's, a lot of people that say that they believe in Jesus is not the same Jesus that is the true Jesus, and we have to identify that. We have to understand that just because somebody says that they believe in Jesus, we need to make sure that it's the actual and the true Jesus and not a counterfeit. There's a lot of people that teach and preach that teach a different gospel, and we have to identify that and know that that's a counterfeit. But all in all, what I'm trying to say is Satan has a counterfeit for everything. So everything that is good, Satan has a counterfeit for. And if we're not careful, we can fall into the trap of falling for that counterfeit and falling for not the good thing. Satan uses religion as a tool. He uses that term or that as a tool. But also, I think Clint mentioned this a little bit on Wednesday, that if something's counterfeit, most people don't counterfeit something unless it's worth something. So, like back in the day, so I say back in the day, I'm only 34 years old, but when I was younger, it still is, like a $100 bill is a lot of money, right? So most people don't counterfeit dollar bills or $5 bills. They counterfeit something that's worth something that's meaningful, something that that is going to bring some type of value, I guess. And it shouldn't discourage us that that there's counterfeits that the devil has counterfeits of Jesus out there, of what that Satan has, in this case, tares out there. That shouldn't discourage us. If anything, that should make us feel confident in what we believe is true. Because if we believe it's true, if we believe what is true, and it is true, then the counterfeit proves that, because nobody wants to counterfeit anything that's not worth anything, that's not worth putting the effort to go through all of that stuff to kind of make it look real. Again, the best counterfeit seems most like the real. Wheat and tares, especially at first, like I said, they look the same and they look alike. But as we kind of go through this, let's see, we'll start back in 24. And we'll just kind of go through real quickly, kind of verse. So again, the kingdom of heaven is likened unto a man which soweth good seed into the field. So we know that the person that is sowing the good seed is the Son of Man from verse 37. It says 25, but while men slept, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat and went his way. And I truly believe that if we're not careful, those of us that are true Christians, true believers, we can, if we fall asleep in what we're doing, if we don't read our Bible like we should, if we don't stay in the faith like we should, if we kind of veer off from what we should be doing, we can fall asleep, if you will, kind of relax, and we can let stuff in our lives that shouldn't be. And that's when, the tares and all that, we can kind of let in. So again, in this story, the men slept and the enemy came and sowed the tares. But when the blade was sprung up, it brought forth fruit, then appeared the tares also. So when the blade of the wheat sprung up, it brought forth fruit, and then there was also the tares as well. And it says, the servants of the householder came and said unto him, Sir, didst not thou sow good seed in thy field? From whence then hath it tares? So you have the servants of the farmer come and say, why is there tares in the field? I thought you sowed good seed and not tares. Again, he said unto them, an enemy hath done this. So while they were asleep, while they were not doing what they were supposed to be doing, the enemy came in and sowed tares among the wheat. And the servant said unto him, wilt thou then go and gather them up? But this is interesting right here. It says, but he said, nay, which no, lest while ye gather up the tares, ye root also the wheat with them. Again, I believe it's not our job necessarily to go around and, lack of a better word, false accusing people's salvation or if they're truly in the faith. I think there obviously should be church discipline, and if you're doing something that you're not supposed to be doing, obviously, then we should have some sort of church discipline, and I feel like that's biblical to restore and get people back to where they need to be. But we shouldn't go around just condemning people, and if they say that they're saved, the only people that knows that they're saved is God. We don't have the ability, nor we should be thankful that we don't have the ability to look into the hearts of everybody and know if they're truly saved or not. I heard somebody preaching over the past couple weeks. I normally try to listen to some stuff while I'm at work, and they said that at a conference or whatever, these young people were all up in arms about certain people and wanting to know if they were truly saved or born again. And there was an older pastor there that was kind of at the conference as well, and kind of said to the young people that, they were asking the older gentleman, do you think that these people are saved? Do you think that they're part of us? And the wise man said, the only person that I know is saved is me. I don't even know if you're saved. So we can't go around and judging folks, based off, if they say they're saved, we have to just take their word for it. And at the end of the day, it's up to God to judge and to separate the wheat from the tares. It says in verse 30, it says, let both grow together until the harvest, and in the time of the harvest I will say to the reapers, gather ye together first the tares, and bind them in bundles to burn them, but gather the wheat into my barn. Again, as we kind of talked about a little bit earlier, as we go through life, and as again, if people say that they're saved, and we have to take their word for it. All we can do is know that we're saved and know that we're going to heaven and that we're in the faith. We just have to teach and preach the gospel, and if God knows who's His and who's not. But at the end, it says that at the time of the harvest, I will say to the reapers, gather ye together first the tares, and bind them in bundles to burn them. And if you go to, I believe, verse 40 or verse 39, it kind of explains a little bit more into this. It says, the enemy that sowed them is the devil. So we know that we talked about the enemy that sowed the tares is the devil, and the harvest of that sowing is the end of the world. And the reapers are the angels. So it clearly identifies, as Jesus is speaking here, he tells the disciples exactly what everything means in his parable. And I think that's very interesting and very, like, I'm glad he did that, because there's obviously some parts of the Bible that have this has a deep meaning, but some other parts of the Bible I feel like, you have to build off of, and you have to know a lot of the Bible, and sometimes it's hard for, especially a young Christian to kind of read, like just for example, Revelation. I mean, if you're a new believer, I don't know if you should start in the book of Revelation to start learning. And I think that's why most people say the Gospels is a good place to start, because right here in Matthew, in the parables, Jesus explains exactly what he was talking about in his story. And he says, the enemy that sowed them is the devil, the harvest is the end of the world, and the reapers are the angels. As therefore the tares are gathered and burned in the fire, so shall it be in the end of the world. So at the end of the world, at the end of time, Jesus is going to separate the wheat from the tares, the true believers from the false believers. And what we have to realize is, again, we can't go around judging people if they say that they're saved or not, but we have to know that, the devil has a counterfeit. So there very well in churches all across the world today be counterfeit Christians in those churches, seeking to benefit from whatever they're trying to benefit from, political or monetary or status in the world. If there's something to gain from being a Christian, there's always a counterfeit. We have to realize that, and we have to know that Jesus at the end of the world will identify the true believers, and will identify the tares or the unbelieving. And it says in verse 41, the Son of Man shall send forth his angels, and they shall gather up out of his kingdom all things that offend, and them which do iniquity, and shall cast them into a furnace of fire. There shall be wailing and gnashing of teeth. And you read in the book of Revelation about the unbelieving being cast into the lake of fire, the devil being cast into the lake of fire. And it says, then shall the righteous shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Who hath ears, let him hear. So throughout this whole parable, I truly believe that it's definitely a good, something that we can kind of cling to, that, we have to do a checkup of ourself. We have to know, first and foremost, that we're saved, that we're in the kingdom of God, that we're part of the wheat, if you will, of this parable. But again, I just want everybody to realize that, throughout your day-to-day walk in this world, not everybody that says that they're a Christian is a Christian, and we have to be on guard. And that's why it's important that you listen to teach or preach or whatever, or even if you're just having a conversation at your job or whatever. It's important that we know and we study the Word of God, to have that information, to have that knowledge, that we can identify if somebody is saying stuff that is false, that is not doctrinal. But as we go through life, we just, again, if it's worth being counterfeit for, it's the trueness of that is that the truth is worth fighting for if the false is trying to counterfeit that. I think that's another reason why you see the disciples when Jesus left and then they started their ministry and then they started getting in age and getting persecuted and stuff. You don't really get persecuted, or you don't go through persecution if you don't truly believe what you're trying to, what you believe. If it was all false, if it was all made up, make believe or whatever, the disciples wouldn't have died in the way that they did. So again, that's about 30 minutes. So that's about all I got. But I thank you for coming this morning, and I hope that maybe you got a little bit out of it this morning. So anybody have anything they want to add? Y'all just like my other class, y'all. So quiet, but...
You were talking about young Christians studying the gospel starting. That's a good thing for old Christians too.
Yeah.
Because it was interesting to me. I've been studying, going to a Bible study group, and we've been in the Gospels of Luke, and it was just interesting to look at different Gospels to see how they all saw different things at the crucifixion in Jesus' life.
Right.
That was just so interesting to me, and I don't know, I just never thought about it that way.
Yeah.
To look at it all in different ways like that.
Yeah, I think you can read a story in the Bible probably 100 times or more and get something jumps out at you differently every time. So, but all right.
I got something, Kyle.
Yeah, go ahead.
When I was a young man, I had me a garden out back of the house. I thought it was festival coming up. So my dad-in-law, he's green thumb. He said, Jerry, them ain't best, all them were weeds.
Yeah.
I thought about it when we talked about tires.
Yeah.
So I had to go dig them all up and restart over.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know much about gardens or anything. I'm hoping maybe one day, since we're moving out to the country, that I can do a garden one day. But it is interesting I like the parables and the way Jesus taught, and if to be there at that particular time must have been unreal to listen from Jesus himself talk about the kingdom of heaven and what's to come. So, anybody have anything else?